KoitCast. Hi Lloyd, welcome back to KoitCast.
Thank you very much, Paul.
It's great to have you here again, so thank you ever so much for agreeing into it. How have you been, fine sir? It's been almost 2 years.
Yeah, well, a bit going on the last couple of years. We've had some really good fundraising for the Ryan Research Center, which is terrific. Our classes are going really well. I republished, I published the second edition of my book, A Paranormal Casebook, which is available worldwide at this point.
Get it
And
now, link in the description, yeah.
yeah, and planning on eventually working on a second volume. Actually, I had some setbacks this year health-wise, but I'm hoping to start working on that very soon, so I can have more cases out, more of the same kind of idea of what's in the case book. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Do you know what? Health is great amount of stuff, by the way, but health is a bugger, isn't it? Because it doesn't it get in the way of our work?
Yes, and you know what? It sucks getting older. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
See that is becoming
Uh-huh.
your style. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I've
and
got
mine
it right thing.
started in my 20s. Yeah, it happens. I mean, mine started in my 20s. I kiddingly say it was when I first grew my first beard, it just kind of moved south. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh well, I hope things are going better for you health-wise now because yeah, it's a pisser when things go wrong.
Yeah, generally, yes. Yeah.
Excellent stuff.
Yeah.
Last time you were on, you mentioned to me that one of your favorite people that you'd like to meet was Nandor Fodor, and you mentioned a film with him that was on Netflix, I believe. I did watch it, and it
Right,
wasn't
but
that
that's
great.
right. No, it wasn't that great. And honestly, from what I knew about Fodor from the member of his family that I'd spoken to and the representative, um, and also what I read his writings and such, it didn't seem like, I love Simon Pegg in so many different
Mm,
roles, but I don't think that they really did justice to him. The case itself, of course, was left up in the air in the movie. It's Nandor Fodor and the talking mongoose.
that's right.
Um, but I don't think that it really did justice certainly to Nandor Fodor himself, and really didn't give his background. It made him seem, I mean, he was skeptical of that case, and that's no question. It's just that I don't think he was represented properly.
Yeah, I just thought it was a bit of a nothingness. There was no depth anywhere.
Yeah,
But I watched
right.
it
Yeah, no,
because
I
of
agree.
you suggested. So yeah, it was worth looking at least anyway. Um, so I want to dive straight into any updates you're aware of. So let's look at paranormal updates. What's been happening in the paranormal sphere recently that's caught your attention and perhaps you're investigating?
Um, I mean, nothing that I'm specifically investigating. I'm mainly still an educator in many respects. I think the one thing that has been developing year by year is more discussion of the concept of consciousness itself, which folks who are ghost hunters may not kind of connect directly to that idea. But when it really comes like down to it, all of the phenomena we're dealing with, whether it is what we witness, in other words, we are the witnesses or experiencers, or let's say that there are apparitions, conscious entities out there, it's about consciousness. And we see more and more discussion in mainstream science about this. And some folks are kind of starting to really look more and more at what parapsychology has been doing, because we're dealing with whether it's the life after death stuff, which implicitly involves consciousness, or I should say explicitly, or the ESP and psychokinesis stuff, which still involves consciousness when we're alive. So there's more and more kind of like trepidation, but still coming over from certain people, even as there are arguments and discussions within various fields of what consciousness is and what generates it and so on. So I think that's the main piece I can see in terms of that's excited me over time. And it really goes back to the idea that, people ask for proof of ghosts. It's like, well, prove consciousness first. I mean, we don't even
Mm,
define it properly. So until you can do that, it's really tough to even get close to getting the kind of evidence you want for apparitions that science demands in so many respects.
Sure. Do you think then that obviously consciousness pretty much is every paranormal thing? It all stems from that source.
Well, yeah, if we're defining psychic phenomena, yeah, it is. It is absolutely is part of that. I mean, if some people use the word paranormal to also describe, UAP, Bigfoot, things like
Mm,
that. We'd have to find a Bigfoot first to make sure they exist, and assuming that they exist, then one philosopher actually described his definition of consciousness was the ability and amount to process information. So there's different levels, different kinds of consciousness. So a dog and a cat has consciousness. A cockroach has conscious, but not human consciousness, and not even close to that. But if you're looking at paranormal as, what is defined on the TV shows, that's really ghosts, hauntings, poltergeists, things like that. That all absolutely involves consciousness. And most importantly, something that part of the educational process for folks who do field investigation work, who take courses or read books, they should always realize that you can't exclude ESP from any experience, except maybe the poltergeist, because they're all physical, and that involves psychokinesis. But I always have to ask the question of ghost hunters. They say, well, parapsychology has nothing to do with this. It's not ESP. It's like, okay, let me ask you this: a ghost doesn't have a body. How does the ghost see you? If they don't have an eye, retina to react to light, how do they hear you? They don't have eardrums to react to sound. How does that happen? And the only answer we have right now is it would be some form of perception of the world that is not sensory, right? Because they don't have
mm,
physical senses. That's the definition of extrasensory perception. No senses. It's not an extra sense. It is non-sensory perception. It's perception without the senses. So that's important. And the other thing is you could not see the ghost because without ESP, without some form of psychic interaction, mainly because ghosts are not optical phenomena. We know that. There's so many reasons why a ghost cannot be an optical phenomena. Maybe they can create that, but that's not the case. They're not acoustical. They don't create sound. Um, there are just so many between the experiences and all the data and the research. They're just like a ball of energy. I don't even want to say ball because that brings up other images too, but they're floating consciousness, and how they think of themselves. That's kind of a transfer of information, how they sound, how they think of themselves, the clothing, all of that stuff. So we can't experience ghosts. We can't experience hauntings without ESP unless a residual haunting happens to be a biophysical thing, which is a model that we look at as well, that it's really the brain picking up on various magnetic signal information, which would make it not psychic, but still different than what we normally think of as sensing. You have to look at what we're dealing with in research in the lab and how that applies to what the phenomena is outside the lab. And what they've looked at in the lab is coming from people's reported experiences. So it kind of it's a closed loop in many respects.
there's a question you've raised in my mind here, which is the psychics, right, have the ability to see or hear directly in their own brain or head or whatever, however it
Right,
presents
right.
to them. Is it the body that gives it that ability, or do they have a different style of consciousness, do you believe, to the people like me and yourself who discussed last time where we don't see or hear anything? Do we have a slightly different consciousness, or is it the body that's different?
Well, first, it is the case that everybody has some aptitude for psychic ability, for ESP and psychokinesis. So that's already there. Whether there seems to be a genetic component, but that hasn't been proven. Um, we don't know how much it doesn't seem to be the brain alone. I mean, the whole thing about consciousness is, what is consciousness? Is it just the brain, or is it more than that? In fact, there was just an article in Psychology Today that looks at the evidence that the brain is not the only place consciousness exists. It's not the be all end all, even if we only limit to materialist ideas, that it's just neurons and things like that. because there are so many cases in medical and in biological history and literature of people who are missing parts of their brain. Often it's because of something called hydrocephalia. There's water on the brain. They're still capable of completely functioning like a normal human being. So that's making no sense when they're missing parts of the brain that should keep them from walking, talking, or doing, or even thinking in some respects. But we also know that the greatest concentration of neurons outside the brain is in the gut. And not too long ago, it was determined that there are neurons on the heart.
Yeah, I heard
There's
that. Yeah.
neural circuits on the heart. So the such supposition is it's not just the brain, it's like this whole, if we're only limiting consciousness to the body, it's this whole process. But as far as the psychic thing goes, it really depends on what consciousness actually is. In some respects, people will say that, one of the ways of looking at consciousness is that consciousness is more than the brain. That's a lot of what our field suggests, is that even without survival of bodily death, there's a lot more that indicates that consciousness is not limited to the brain case, that it can pick up things non-locally from the environment, like remote viewing. But then you add in things like near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, apparitional experiences, and it's looking like consciousnesses may be generated by the system, but it certainly can exist or extend beyond the body pretty easily. Again, it depends on the philosophy. If you're a materialist, you're not going to buy that at all.
Yeah,
So there's that element there.
I'm open to
But
both,
one of the
like
things
whether
that
it's
is,
external or generated from within us. What do you think of well, let's just call it an etheric field, a consciousness field. What do you think of that? I know you haven't got the scientific data to back it up, but what do you think of it? That's a theory.
well, I think the idea that it's often sometimes called the information field too. That's
Mm,
another, or the Akashic field, or,
yes.
there's all sorts of names, or the Force. You could call it the
I
Force
like that one
for
better.
that matter.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I like that one. That's my favorite too. Yeah. We may just tap into information. I mean, that's the whole thing about consciousness may be able to not may actually be out here. I mean, one of the suggestions about or ideas about what consciousness may be is that the body, the brain, we are the interface. So basically, we are like a TV set hooked up to cable or a satellite dish, and we get the signal, which the interface gathers information and feeds it back to the signal. So it's two ways in that way. And if anything happens to our bodies or our brains, in some instances, you've screwed up the interface. That doesn't mean the consciousness is gone or different. It just means that the interaction, the interface doesn't work very well in that context. There's all sorts of ideas, but I do think that there is, based on the idea of residual hauntings and that people pick up emotions and from the environment, there is definitely information, whether it's a consciousness field like physicists might describe, or information field. It's really about the wording. It's semantics,
Of
but
course
it's
it is,
there.
yeah. Until we can measure and or prove it, it's one or t'other, and it doesn't matter, I suppose. Like you said, it's just semantics.
Yeah, and in science, it's really not about proof. It's really about measurement in many respects and gathering evidence, because you can't prove certain things. That in some respects, it's about acceptance. So
Yeah, because you could gather nine things and it looked like it's this. That's the science we've argued, we've proved it. But then one thing you might find 30 years down the line that disproves it. So, science still isn't that sort of thing.
which is the history. It's totally the history of science, and
Mm,
it's why science is not just simply. Science is not a book of knowledge. It is a process.
yeah, book of current knowledge. That's it. Yeah.
Right. That's it. Yeah. Current
Mm,
knowledge. We're waiting for the next edition.
yes. Which you'll write very soon. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
Are there
Right.
any are there any ongoing experiments that you know of relating to ghosts that might give further insights? So any of your colleagues or anything that you're aware of doing things?
Yeah. I mean, most of my colleagues are not doing work directly on the idea of apparitions or ghosts in that way. There's some work. Gary Schwartz and some others have been working on something to allow spirits to communicate with us. Much easier than something like EVP or something like that. But that's assuming you get cooperation. This is the problem. We can't
Mm,
really do an experiment with a ghost because we can't be sure that a ghost is present other than maybe having a medium or psychic there who can sense ghosts. That's the only way you'd know, or some other human. that knows that the ghost is present. There's been the experiments have gone on looking in some respects at the correlations that we found or not found with environmental sensors. There's of course research that's been going on electronic voice phenomena, but it's really more about interpretation than actually how it actually happens. Partly again because we cannot be sure that there's a ghost or spirit that's actually interacting with the device or with other things for sure. We just can't get that point. I always like to say that we'd love to do experiments with ghosts, but it's really hard to tie them down to a schedule and put them in the lab.
Yeah, and not only
It's
that,
it, it's the
isn't
same.
it a case of you can't guarantee that that entity or whatever you're conversing with is trustworthy?
Well, there's that too. No, this is if we're talking about human beings, dead human beings, humans are humans. What's really pretty clear from the ones who stick around for a while, and not everybody does. Not everybody's a ghost. Folks seem to, according to the really good evidential mediums, most people do move on to wherever they're communicating from. Um, and it is not the case that an apparition has to tell the truth. I mean, because a person doesn't have to tell the truth for that matter. So we don't even know, back in the 80s, there were channelers galore, people channeling entities from ancient Atlantis and from other planets and all spirit animals and all these things, ancient gods, all of that. And unlike mediumship, where a medium speaking to a spirit can get sometimes truly factual information about that person. In other words, enough to identify who that was, not just their name, but enough to identify that there's enough characteristics that are coming through. There was no way to have ID on an ancient god, a Greek god, or an alien, or somebody else coming through. I mean, how do you get ID from those folks? They can't even provide enough background. For example, I sat with a couple of channelers, and one was channeling somebody from the Pleiades, planets around the Pleiades star group. It's like, what's your planet like? Couldn't get any information. I mean, just could not get any sort of anything that would have indicated that that entity had any knowledge of their environment, where they were kind of where they lived or live. And my joke is that hey, how do you know these channeled entities are not like dead used car or vacuum cleaner salesmen who went door to door in the 1930s?
Yeah, exactly.
And
With a card
they
they made
figured
themselves.
nobody's right. Nobody's going to listen to them if they say, "Hey, I'm Fred Smith, and I sold vacuum cleaners in Trenton, New Jersey, my entire life." I mean, I have some things to say. Well, nobody's going to listen to that.
No, I agree.
So
I have
it's
an issue with
really
channeling. Do you? In that you have to trust two things, both the channelers being 100% honest and then whatever potential entity is being 100% honest. So it gets worse as the chain goes on, you know what I mean?
and really you have to look at the information. I usually considered channeling, and I met some channelers who I was positive, and especially some of them actually went for like brain scans or EEG stuff. And they were in altered states. I mean, they were definitely in an altered state of consciousness. But as John Klimo, who was one of my colleagues who wrote like the book on channeling, it's called Channeling, exploring it in all cultures, and he did studies of channelers as well. He and others put forth the idea that many of these folks were in altered states. And I guess you could say the culture itself was kind of suggesting how they should express things in that altered state. They were people who did not necessarily feel comfortable. Think of it as imposter syndrome. They didn't feel comfortable giving advice to people in their roles. But in an altered state, there's other personality would come up, or the story would come up that allowed them to present something that they felt they might have, maybe they wanted to do that. It's their unconscious that's doing it. So there's some of that. And psychically, sometimes psychic stuff would come through these other entities too, but pretty rare. Again, one of the channelers I work with, she started talking to John Klimo about this and realized, because she was channeling three different entities, one of which was like a 17th century Irish woman, possibly one of her ancestors. And she was coming through with actual information. Most channelers had stories, or they gave pop culture. They were like, pop culture psychologists. They were not giving anything substantive at all. There was nothing no really real advice other than what you get watching television and a psychologist on TV. So in her case, she was coming up with some other information and working with John, and then working with, working alongside me and some other things. It turned out the characters dropped away because she got confidence in her own psychic ability and she became a good psychic.
Yeah, that's what I was
So
thinking
it
earlier
was
when
the
you
case
said
in her.
there was like another entity. That's a person's psychological way of defending themselves against
Yeah,
worry about giving stuff. They can throw the blame onto that other personality. That's what that is, isn't it?
right,
Essentially.
right, right. It's kind of like psychics, good psychics who usually, because the customers, their clients want to see it. Good psychics might end up having to pull out a deck of tarot cards and never look at the tarot card, just throw them on the table, just spread them out and then still do the psychic reading because the people wanted that. And on the other hand, they could always blame anything negative on the cards.
Exactly. And speaking of readings, have you ever had any personal medium readings, or do you avoid it?
No, I have. I've had many over the years. I've had both mediumship readings, sessions, and psychic readings as well. I will say that I've had readings from several very, very bad psychics, a couple of whom, and this was especially back in the 80s when we had our graduate parapsychology program at JFK University. We'd have psychics presenting themselves that they wanted to work with us either in the lab, or generally they wanted to go on investigations, mainly because of the publicity of Ghostbusters. And many of those who did that, I would have them do a reading first for me, and then I might take them to a place where I knew something was going on, but they didn't. If they did at least a halfway decent job on the readings, and frankly, only a couple of them passed that test, you might say. I felt that there was one in particular that I really believe was a fraud and just trying to put one over on us. She was nothing she said was anything outside of generalization and um, fishing. Let's put it was very much cold reading, which is my magic training kind of helps me with that. Um, but there were a couple of others that didn't necessarily have a glimmer of psychic ability, but after talking to them extensively and finding out why they started putting themselves out as a psychic, they sincerely believed they had these abilities and they were good observers and they were unconsciously doing, observation and kind of the Sherlock Holmes thing without even thinking about it. But they were sincere in their belief, partly because people told them, convinced them they were psychic and that they should hang up a shingle. So
Hmm.
it really runs the gamut. But I've had some really good readings with very specific information, and mostly not predictions. I don't really hold a lot of stock in predicting the future in general for a number of reasons. But I actually had a reading from a Dutch psychic, a well-known one named M.B. Dijkshoorn back in the 70s when my uncle was a newscaster for a radio station in New York. The psychic was in from the Netherlands and promoting a book, and he had worked with Interpol and all sorts of stuff. And he did a reading for me that kind of blew me away in that he was doing impressions of people I knew. I mean,
Whoa.
how they walked, how they talked. And my uncle knew some of these people. My uncle was a total skeptic, and he was like, "What the hell?" Like, he just could not believe it. And he did say to me, um, something was Jen. He said, he said, obviously you're interested in parapsychology. I know you want to write a book on the subject. And actually, at that time, I was planning on writing science fiction, honestly. And he said to me, you're gonna publish your first book on parapsychology when you're 30 years old. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And the interesting
It
thing
should have
there,
been published when I was
it
29.
it was that you fulfilling the prophecy, so to speak, or was that the
No, it
prediction? Do
was
you know what I
not,
mean?
because here's the thing. I got the book contract because of publicity from Ghostbusters, which was well after that. I wouldn't have gotten an agent or a book contract otherwise. And the book was originally slated to be published when I was 29, but the publisher, because of scheduling, had to put it back to the following year. So I had nothing to do with directly. I mean, indirectly, yes, because I wrote the book, but I had nothing to do with that particular thing coming true. But that could have also been a fluke. Mediumship readings. I've had some really, really interesting readings let's just say I've been in group sessions with an Irish medium by the name of Sandra O'Hara, who has passed away, and did not expect anything. I was there really to observe, to not to participate, didn't expect anything to come through. And some stuff came through. My father and a colleague of mine, Martin Caden, came through with my father, and there was really no way she had been in from Ireland. There's no way she could have known some of the stuff that was coming through, and that was in a couple of instances. My late partner, investigations partner, Annette Martin, did a reading for me also. Just certain things she could not have known, even though knowing me for a few years, she could not have known certain things. So we do have, and we do have evidential mediums we test for the Forever Family Foundation, and that's one area in laboratory research, working with mediums, which connects to the whole spirit thing, but doesn't necessarily connect to ghosts per se.
Sure, sure. Well, I like that you've experienced it personally, rather than as part of an investigation or research, you've had it privately. So that
Right.
almost not sends you down a path, but it adds validation of sorts. I like that.
Yeah, and when I teach some of my classes, one of the things I wrote a paper years ago and did a presentation at a conference on mediumship put on by the Parapsychology Foundation, trying to pull together. It was a conference on mediumship. I did a paper on the qualities of mediums besides being accurate, or coming up with good information, which is never going to be 100% because nobody is. Um, I found certain qualities of the better ones, and especially I was giving advice for people who might want to do investigations or bring people into the laboratory. And there were certain common factors of personality factors that I found of the best mediums I had worked with and some of the psychics I knew about and colleagues had worked with. And and I try to pass this along to ghost hunters all the time. It has to be somebody you want to work with. Number one, it has to be somebody, honestly, it has to be somebody with a sense of humor, especially about themselves. If they take themselves too seriously, that's not good. I will never work with someone unless I have really good reason who says, I'm 95% accurate, which we hear from psychics all the time. And I challenge that. It's like, how do you calculate that? Because they'd have to follow up on every single statement they make to every single client. And if they're predicting things and they said something's going to happen in 5 years, they'd have to follow up on that, which they don't do. They don't do any of that follow up. So that is just something that is, they hear other psychics doing it on TV and they start saying those things. So they don't really know themselves. And I want a psychic who knows themselves. And frankly, I will not work with anybody who is so egocentric. I mean, healthy ego is good, but I have been on cases with a couple of ghost hunting groups and their team psychic or me or whatever they called them. As soon as the attention was off of them, they started doing I'm picking something up, because everything had to be on that about them,
About them, yeah, yeah, yeah. I
not
don't
about the
like that
client.
myself, yeah.
Yeah, and
No, no need for it.
that doesn't work for any sort of. It doesn't work. Being a diva, we don't need that.
It turns people off. No, I'm with you on that one. Before I branch into the teaching aspect of your life, because I'm interested in that, I want to talk to you briefly about the telepathy tapes. Presumably, you're aware of that scenario.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you think then autism plays into what we know about paranormal spirituality, ghosts, etc., etc.? How do you think it plays?
Well, first, I really don't think I know that the telepathy tapes the first season. It didn't. I mean, it really touched on things, but it really didn't portray Diane Powell's research properly. I mean, there were a lot of things that were left out. There were things that were exaggerated. I mean, it's for entertainment in some respects. I was introduced to her research, I think, as far back as 2009 in those circumstances. And the thing is that with autism, you're dealing with people, think of it as their brains are wired differently. And that may allow for an ability to bring out the ability to pick up other information, again, through ESP, through non-sensory means, through consciousness. Because in some respects, for us that do not have autism or anything weird in our brains, not that that's weird, but we get in our own ways. when we teach people to be psychic, and it's what the remote viewers have said for years, they learn the first thing they had to learn is get out of their own way and not to judge, label, or categorize as things are coming in, because we make assumptions. I mean, human beings naturally look for patterns and we fill in blanks. So if I start getting some picture in my head because I'm doing remote viewing and something's not clear, if the rest of it looks similar to something I've experienced, I know of, my brain, my mind might just fill in the blank, even though psychically I can't get that piece of the puzzle. And that causes absolute misses in many instances, misidentification of information. So when someone has something else going on, and people who have, some people who have been traumatized, they're not autistic, but they've been traumatized, something has shifted in them, and some people suddenly become very psychic. Near-death experiences causes people often to be psychic. So it can be truly psychological, it can be neurological, or anything else can cause things to open up in different ways. And with autistics, given that many of them have, not all of them certainly, have problems with communication in general, so there's something going on there that prevents that, finding another channel of communication makes sense when you include the fact that, we think it's a fact that ESP exists. So a lot of that makes sense. Now, that the thing talked about the hill where they all kind of get
Yeah, yeah.
together consciousness-wise, that's a little tougher to really kind of relate to what we find in the lab. There's really no absolute way to say that exists. There's clearly in these experiments an interaction, information goes back and forth, but whether or not they get together in some mind space or psyscape or mindscape is really hard to deal with. Just as it is to really know what somebody else is feeling. I mean, I always point to emotions. We have research on emotions, which frankly is not all that great because when it comes right down to it, even the brain research on emotions is not all that great because you can't get spontaneous emotions from people in the lab. So we are missing pieces, and we can't, we can empathize with people. If we've had the same experience, we can get what that feels like, but we really can't when it comes right down to it. So it's really hard subjectively. We're dealing subjective experiences. It's hard to really get to everything.
That's why I asked you the question earlier about what do you think about the field, the information field, or whatever we think about, and it made me think of the hill, which is that
Sure,
just that,
sure.
just a small pocket version of it, I liked it as a
It
concept.
might be, yeah. And I mean, it might be that they have, you can say that maybe they're all able to tune into the same frequency as a group of them in some way.
Yeah, I love it. Anyway, we'll move on from that. Teaching. What does teaching give you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for one thing, teaching, some of us really enjoy, number one, presenting, talking. I have to say that I like that. Um, and really, I have always felt, because I learned from other people. I had several mentors in the field. Went through graduate school, obviously had really good professors. I also had some really good people in college in anthropology. And I really appreciated them passing on what they learned and discussing things. Combine that with growing up in the media. My dad worked for NBC. My uncle worked for CBS most of his life. That other uncle I mentioned, my mother's brother I was a radio newscaster. I had always intended, as I kind of got into parapsychology from teenage years, that I would use that media background to help present real information about the subject, because there was so much misinformation or exaggerated information or pop culture mythology out there on things. And in fact, my very first couple of jobs in parapsychology were specifically doing outreach to the public and outreach to the media and reacting to that. So, which is one of the reasons why I do things like this and so many other media opportunities I've had over the years. I like seeing, like, I know that some of the people I worked with like seeing the light go on in my head in my eyes and my interest increasing, I like seeing that and hearing that from my students. I really like to know that they got something out of what I've talked about, what John Kruth and the other instructors for the Ryan Education Center. We want to know, number one, that they're kind of really getting the idea of what we're really doing, what the phenomena really is, what the experiences are, the research, all of that. But we want to kind of encourage people to look deeper and to ask questions, to go further. So even talking to ghost hunting conferences and things like that, where I know I'm going to have resistance because I'm telling them things that sometimes is contrary to what they've learned from the TV shows, like directly in conflict. Some people, you see the light go on. It's like you see an aha light bulb above their head kind of thing. And if I can get a percentage of those people to really recognize and then even start doing better investigations, which then helps the people that we help with investigating from a parapsychological perspective, that's a positive for me. Absolute positive for me as well.
No, fair play. I want to talk about the legacy of your work and others like you. Are there enough people taking up the mantle in order to carry on the research and or the jobs you do?
Unfortunately, not. We'd like to. We're seeing more and more people kind of coming through, but people have been always, like myself included, always look for an academic pathway for doing that. And the reality is there's just not a lot of funding in parapsychology at this point in time. There are not a lot of opportunities. It's not like there's a career path per se. And we're pretty upfront about that. And even when I was in high school writing to J.B. Ryan and finding out how can I become a parapsychologist, at that time there wasn't even a graduate program. And right now there is a new graduate program at the the California Institute for Human Sciences, which is also online. But there weren't opportunities. And what I got from J.B. Ryan and other parapsychologists I connected with was study some other field, be prepared to work in that field, but look for a field and look for graduate work where you can bring in your interest in parapsychology, where you can actually do some work that connects to parapsychology. Because parapsychology in many respects is an interdisciplinary field. So today, we've been hoping that there be more young people coming in, and there are more people coming in. In England, they have people going into there are universities that have some degree of parapsychology or anomalistic psychology. Again, they're hoping for jobs directly in the field, but there's not much there until we can get more funding. But someone who is working in anthropology, who is in a position, whether it's practical, non-academic or academic, where they can bring in some of that cross-cultural interest in parapsychology is great. Somebody who's in psychology who can specialize in helping people with psychic experiences. There are positions in other fields, and they can contribute back to parapsychology. And then the one thing I would tell people now is start looking at the developing world of consciousness studies, because there are specializations in consciousness happening, and that's where we really need people who are interested in parapsychology. We need that because that's where there's going to be major movement.
Yeah, that's the growth area. I like that. I had a supplementary question, and I think you've answered it already. And this question may sound like I'm being a shit when I ask it, but I'm genuinely not. Are your educational courses packed out? Now, that I wrote that with the intent of working out, is there a future for parapsychology? That's all. So do you
Packed
have
tight, meaning a lot of
packed
people in
out,
them?
as in a lot of people? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, some classes we have a lot of people. Some classes we have our minimum. It depends actually sometimes depends on when the specific topic is being offered. Some of our classes, like Paul Smith teaches a remote viewing class that's always got like dozens and dozens of people. I teach a course on developing ESP, which has lots of people. But I've taught field investigations, for example, where we've had more than the number of people that I want to handle at one time. We look for an average of like 10 to 20 students every time we offer a course. And most of the time we get at least 10, 12, 15 students. I've had a couple of offerings of the same class where I had 9 students one year and 32 students the following year. So it varies, but in general, our classes are are filling up. We've had an upswing of number of people as they learn about the Ryan Education Center, as they learn that we are offering these online classes that you can take anywhere in the world. Yeah, we're getting more and more people for that. So we are getting folks, and we offer certificate programs as well.
Good, because I would hate to think that someone of your ilk and quality, all your knowledge is just waning away because less and less people over the course of time take up the mantle. I don't want to see that. I want to see this continue because I think this is the big area of growth for humanity is the mind and what we can do and what there is.
Well, I think the pandemic actually helped in some respects
Oh,
because, you know, the idea before the pandemic, people were not used to the idea of online anything, like online classes, online meetings, except in certain industries. But once the pandemic happened, that's when we saw a huge upswing in students. I think we probably had the largest group of students at that right after, because people were looking for something else to do from their homes when they were locked in.
yes.
So we started seeing universities offering online degrees. You know, all that started happening because Zoom became ubiquitous. It became part of the culture in some respects, as did other platforms as well. I was teaching some local classes here in the Bay Area from about 2005 to 2018 on parapsychology. Um, they were not academic in the way that I didn't have students necessarily having to do papers or grade them that way, but I did have a lot of people up front as we spread the word. This was taught at a local hypnotherapy school here in the East Bay, east of San Francisco. But we have terrible traffic patterns in the Bay Area, and they got worse and worse, and more. We had waning numbers of students coming because people didn't want to buck the traffic for an evening class because it was going to be right after commute time. So it's like I wasn't getting people from San Francisco and I wasn't getting people from Silicon Valley because it would take them way too long to get there. So the online thing became really important in that respect. I mean, and we have to look at that as in-person class type stuff. Um, we had a lot of people when I was at JFK University on the faculty. We had a lot of people asking about taking the classes back in the 80s until the program ended around 87. And so many people said, I would love to attend this program, but I can't move to California. Don't have the money to move to California. And forget about paying the tuition, which wasn't that bad at that time. But for people to pick up and move when there's not an absolute career path, and even if there is you know, we know some students, some people going to college don't like to go more than 100 miles from their homes, and others will go cross country. I mean, I went to Northwestern. I'm from New York. I did leave the New York area, and I came out to California because this is the only place that I was able to study parapsychology. Now it's different because people can do it from wherever they are.
Yeah, I like that. When I went to university, I went to university 8 miles away from my house. I wouldn't want to go anywhere further than that. So yeah, online is super for people like me of my ilk. So yeah, I'm
Yeah,
glad there's an
yeah.
uptick there. Last time we spoke, you mentioned that you ran a course about looking at the unexplained from a science fiction perspective. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Yeah, every once in a while we offer a kind of a pop culture and psychic phenomena course, which I love talking about. You know, I'm a movie and TV geek, again, because of my background in the medium. So the idea of the class is to look at different phenomena of consciousness and of the purely ESP, PK, ghostly stuff, and then examine how that's been shown or discussed or presented in literature, comic books, mainly movies and TV, because that's kind of the low-hanging fruit for folks in many respects. But I do talk about science fiction, some really great science fiction novels. Um, Took look at the good and the bad. What are the good presentations? What are the bad presentations? And really even talk in that class, I even talk about um, not just consciousness after death, but also the body after death, getting up and walking around like zombies and vampires and things
The
like
good
that. So
stuff,
a
yeah,
little
yeah.
bit about that. Yeah, yeah, it's fun stuff to talk about. And one of my favorite topics of that class is, of course, talking about the ghost movies that have been out over the years. And I'd have to revise. I haven't taught the class since the time we talked. I'll be teaching it again, I believe, next year, since there's only a certain number of classes I can teach at any one time. Um, and I have to revise every time and talk about the newer stuff that's actually out there, the new movies. And I started including, because consciousness is part of that class, I started including artificial intelligence, AI, as a topic as well, because there is a long history of AI gone wrong, of course. We're all waiting right now here in the Bay Area to make sure that Skynet does not start up
It'll
as
never
a
stop
startup
that
company.
one. You can't stop it. There's always a new movie.
Well, I don't know about it. We just, our governor just signed a bill to prevent that from happening, actually. That doesn't mean that someone won't do it under the radar, but and I work a little bit in AI stuff with AI stuff today myself. So it's really interesting to include that. But when you talk about some of the robots, you have Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation, who even the one episode where they talked about him, whether he was actually a conscious entity, sentient life form, that kind of thing. There are some really interesting ethical and philosophical implications around psychic abilities, and some movies and TV shows deal with that, others don't. But the thing that really is fun for me is how sometimes certain genres or subgenres of film. So, for example, movies and TV shows, looking at ghosts. Just let's take ghosts for a second. If you really look at the history of movies with ghosts, and you look at the way the ghosts are portrayed in those movies, and you start doing good or bad or neutral in that, the vast majority of movies with ghosts portray them as human beings. I mean, you've got the TV show Ghosts in the UK, which became a popular show here in the United States. That show apparently is now in France. There's somebody in France doing a version of that. They're doing it in Australia. I mean, it's really popular. And those ghosts, individual personalities, they're comedies. They show them as people, the whole bit. That's what you see in most movies and TV shows. And that's what you've seen since the beginning of Hollywood, for the most part, or at least since the beginning of the talkies. And that's an important distinction, because people having experiences with ghosts experience them as human beings. Now, the horror films take a different tact, make them a more demonic, more evil, certain other things, and cross over into the whole, demonic, satanic, the Satan thing, the religious aspect of things. And they don't have as much, they have an impact viscerally, but they don't really kind of set the scene for or related to actual experiences. So part of what I try to cover is, if for people who haven't taken any of my other classes, I try to look about, here's the real experience, here's what the shows do. Sometimes they get it right, though exaggerated. Sometimes it's like watching the X-Men. It's a superpower, which is okay too.
Agreed. Do you think
I think that
if you had to look at pop culture, movies, TV shows, etc., is the slant more towards spectral visitations being negative than positive?
on the reality shows, for sure, that's not, that happens on the ghost hunting shows. There's no question that because that gets ratings. So part of it is about ratings. When you're dealing with that. So the slant is often, all right, let me back up. The most emotional reaction that a show or a movie gets out of us is when it scares us or makes us uneasy or anxious. That is something that can stick with you for a while. You may never go back to that show again, or you may just go back because you like that feeling. That's one reason people go to horror films or go on a roller coaster, things like that. The dramatic shows, the comedy shows have to have something to them. They have to work harder to keep that audience, because even if they're very, very funny, that's about the only thing that's going to keep people coming back, because they want to laugh. So it really becomes much more difficult. It is, in some respects, it's much easier to do. It is easier and it's harder, but it's much easier to get an emotional reaction for something negative, which is why, and frankly, that's why the news is so negative. We don't see a lot of good stories in the news either.
Agreed. Yeah, it's all
We're
rage
worried
bait, isn't
about
it?
the world. This is, yeah, it's just the reality of things. So it's sad that there have been some really good shows on the air here in the U.S. There have been good movies that haven't done well, that I think are really good examples of bringing up ideas that people should talk about or think about. In the meantime, they get scared by something, and all of a sudden they think that every sound in their house is like something negative because they're on edge the whole time.
Well, sometimes that noise in your house is a burglar. So you have to think of
Well,
when
there's
to
that.
attack.
I'm fine with that. But there was a survey. I don't know if we talked about this last time, but there was a survey I ran into, which was done by realtors. It was a survey of real estate folks after the pandemic, and it was done by a real estate association. They had been hearing from some of the real estate agents out there that customers of the agents selling homes or buying homes for people were hearing from their customers after the lockdown that their houses were haunted, and it was a huge upswing of people believing their homes were haunted. And thanks to the survey, it was interesting that the real estate folks, the realtors, understood why that was without doing any investigation. And it was because, and it was actually a truism, because people were locked in their homes for the first time, possibly ever, for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they were suddenly noticing things that they had never noticed before. And if they happened to be watching the paranormal, the ghost hunting shows, or watching horror movies or anything else, those people reported even more that things are paranormal in their homes.
Yeah, I get it.
So it
If
wasn't
they're
about
out of work,
burglars.
they're not hearing the
Yeah,
weird sounds, are they? Yeah.
no, and you don't think about them at night on a normal night, but if you're stuck in your house and it's like, where did that come from? Especially if you just watched a horror film, or been watching the ghost hunting shows where they tell you that everything is, what was that over there? And it's just a weird thing, but it's something we knew about. We knew a long time ago. It's just was good to see a practical association recognize that, and try to tell their clients. I said, that's important to know that there are normal things that make you think stuff is paranormal, and we have to sort through those. Now the realtors hopefully are doing that for us to some extent.
Agreed. And one of the common ones for me that sometimes I think, oh, what the hell's that? And Tiff's thought the same thing. Like she thinks, oh, sometimes there's people in this room here while we're downstairs. And I just say, no, this is where my electronics are in here, right? And so it gives us heat. So there's plastic in my windows, there's expansion and contraction. It's just that more often than
Right,
not. But
right.
that's one of them things.
Yeah,
Um,
and we have where I live, we have in the summertime it can be 100 degrees. I live in a valley outside of San Francisco. It can be 100 degrees and then drop down to 65 or something like that at night because we're kind of technically high desert. And in that kind of change, the house is going to do things because of temperature differences.
exactly. It does its settling and all that malarkey at night. It's trying to get us, but it won't win. Um, Speaking of like sci-fi TV and stuff like that, have you watched any super lush sci-fi and TV recently that you think is worthy of a watch?
Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of Star Trek, Strange New Worlds. Um, that just completed its thing. I am a Star Trek fan from the original, from way back when. In fact, I recently bought a tricorder replica from the original series that works.
Really?
It
Whoa.
actually has it has EMF in it. It has temperature sensors, atmospheric sensors. That's the main reason I bought it because
I
it has
need to
all that extra
know,
stuff.
I
It's got a
need
lot
to
of Star
know,
Trek.
is it within reach? Yes. It was in your pocket, wasn't it?
No, it was sitting behind me.
Oh, amazing. Does it do the
So it
noises?
actually, let's see if I can, let me just turn this on here. All right, so it's got a working screen.
Yeah, cool. Nice.
I don't know if you'll hear the noise. Probably not, because Zoom is going to probably screen it out.
I heard a bit then, like the yeah, Zoom
Yeah,
screens most things out,
it
yeah.
doesn't make the noise unless you turn that on, actually. But it's actually got all of Kirk's logs on it too. But it also has the ability to record logs, so I can record my own logs. I
I
mean,
think you
I
should.
love Star Trek. When I saw this, it's actually a British company called the Wand Company that did this replica, and I have yet to use it on an investigation. I'm sure I'm never going to be able to use it on a TV show unless Paramount owns the show.
Yeah,
But
yeah, of course.
it's yeah, but it's the fact that it actually works with the MF. It actually has an acoustical sensor, which is really, really sensitive. And it has a whole, like I said, atmospheric sensors, things that all in one device, which is great. It can't sense life forms, unfortunately, but it has a lot. So anyway, so Star Trek: The Strange New Worlds is the one that I've seen that I guess you'd say lush, high, with huge budget kind of thing for that. Um, Trying to think what else. I'm actually gone back and started watching a show called Eureka,
I've
which
heard
was a
of it, but I've
Sci-Fi
never
Channel
seen it.
show. Yeah, it's worth watching. Yeah, it's about a town where they're inventing all sorts of stuff, for the government and such, and a lot of it's a fun show. There's some great shows out there. I'm just trying to think of what other, Foundation's a really interesting show that's on Apple Plus.
Foundation is superb.
That's another,
Yeah.
yeah, that's another really interesting show. Um, Trying to think what else might be psychic related in that way. Yeah, nothing's popping up in my head at the moment
That's
right
okay.
now.
Foundation, I thought was outrageously good. Um, very high-end production, that one. Cinematic, epic, especially the third series. I
Yeah.
just finished that off about a week ago. That was ace. What did you think of Strange New Worlds? Presumably watched the third season. That's the one I'm referring to.
Yeah, I finished the third season. I think that I kind of, as a fan of the original series, they've gone off in different genres a lot more than the original series, and they included there's a little bit more comedy in a couple of the episodes and more horror in the couple of the episodes than you saw in the original series. But I think that's where we are in our society today too. Um, and I was surprised at how good the musical episode was in season two. Um, it was very, very good. It just contextually as well, why that happened. And of course, there have been musical episodes for all sorts of shows, starting with Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yes.
That's the show that actually started that trend in many respects. Um, the the episode where they all, the group became Vulcans was very amusing. At the same time, kind of really enlightening in some respects. Kind of gave some context to Spock a lot more than other things. So it was some really good. They explored a bunch of really interesting concepts, and as before, as the original series, as all the series have done, there is a little bit of exploration of non-corporeal or non-physical beings. Actually including the big bad at the hat. I don't want to spoil that for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, but the big bad for the last couple of episodes that was there, that connects actually to some of the original series episodes without naming names. So
Yeah. And it was nice to
even
hear
the
from Q
episode,
again, wasn't it?
yeah, it was nice to hear from Q. And the reason they did that, first of all, it was great to see Trelane again,
Mm.
who was in the original series, whose parents, jumped in on that. And there was actually a novel, one of the Star Trek novels in the 90s, I want to say, early 90s, explored, Q quite a bit and basically talked about Trelane being one of the Q, being a kid Q and the whole bit. So that was a really, really good callback, I think.
Yeah. I know exactly that reference, and I liked it when he suddenly came in at the end. I thought, yeah, I know exactly what you're referring to there. I love that. I still don't
Yeah,
like massively
yeah.
the appearance of the Gorn and how they did that, but I'll take it.
No, yeah, yeah. I think they just wanted to go into a different direction with that. But then again, something I was just reading recently, looking at those episodes, was I don't remember if they were interviewing somebody from the show, but there were some comments like, do all humans look alike? Maybe, with there are Andorians, there are Vulcans. Maybe this was a different group of Gorn than the one that we saw in the original series.
Ah, there you go. Yeah, good point. Good point. Do you remember that show? I can't remember if we spoke about this last time. Actually, no, we didn't. It was somebody else who spoke about it. In the Next Generation, one of the later episodes, season 6 or 7, they explored the idea, didn't they, that why do all humanoid species on Star Trek look alike? Wasn't just
Yeah,
makeup and the
the
limitations of
progenitors.
TV. They made the origin story for it, and I like that.
Right. the progenitors seeding all sorts of planets with
That's
basic
it.
DNA.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and it's an interesting concept. I mean,
Mm.
um, it does make sense in the Star Trek universe that that actually happened. Whether that we won't know if that has happened at all, or if there's parallel. Originally I think they thought it was parallel evolution, just basically that. Given similar environments, you expect certain things to develop in certain ways, but that really kind of brought it all together. I mean, really, we share DNA with so many other critters on our planet, uh, going way, way, way back. So having something planted instead of that first sign of life, where did DNA develop? I mean, that's a big question for that, and it's still being explored by science today.
Yeah, I love it. Star Trek leads the way in a lot of ways, and there's one more subject I want to talk about Star Trek. You know, in Discovery, not Discovery, in Voyager. I assume you watched Voyager at some
Yeah.
stage. They
Yep.
had that whole species of like sentient dinosaurs, and they said that they evolved from Earth. I
Yeah.
like that theory as well because that could explain the reptilians, or what people refer to. It's a possibility.
Yeah, if the reptilians are real, that could explain that they actually came from here originally. Yeah, in that, yeah, the idea of trying to come find, of course, there's been no evidence of any sort of culture
Mm.
or technology from 65 plus million years ago, and I don't know that we'd find it very easily in any circumstance. If they developed on a continent that's sunk, for example, on something that's no longer above water, for example, we would not, and then you'd have to dig down to find it. So I thought that was a really interesting exploration. It's been done in other comic books as well, and comic books over the years as well. But I think that they did a really good job with that, and having them have so much more advanced technology. If they hadn't, I'd be surprised. It would have been a bad show simply because 65 million years is a long time to develop, not
Oh
just
yeah.
not just physically, but otherwise. And they had to have been advanced enough physically at that time when the rest of the dinosaurs died out to have left Earth to begin with.
Exactly. So they were about to have some measure of technology to escape Earth gravity, being one
Yeah,
thing
that's
alone.
right. That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. Um, on the subject of Star Trek, before we get back into teaching and stuff, did you bother with Section 31?
Yeah, I watched it. I didn't see it as a Star. I liked it, but I didn't think it was a Star Trek movie.
Mm.
I mean, it
And
was a
that
sci-fi
answers why
movie.
I
It
haven't
wasn't a
seen
Star
it
Trek
then.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's worth watching, but again, it's not a Star Trek movie.
Yeah, and I don't like that. We should not slap Star Trek on something if it isn't Star Trek because it's a specific brand
Yeah,
that
well, I mean,
people want to watch.
couple of the characters came out, and certainly the races and stuff came out of Star Trek, but um, it didn't it didn't it didn't even stick with the Section 31 concepts that we even got out of other shows. So
Ah, solve that then.
it was
Also,
like a strike force. So yeah.
yeah, fair enough. Did you see the Star Trek short with Spock and Kirk in it? You know that one where they sort of like did the CGI to bring Kirk and Spock back into, and Spock died on Vulcan
Oh
looking
yeah,
at.
yeah, I did. Yeah, yes, I did. That was beautiful. That was really
Mm.
well done.
With no
I thought.
words as well. I
Yeah,
thought it was lush.
and I, you didn't need words for that. That's the
Mm.
thing is that when you have characters that are known, especially, I couldn't imagine anybody watching that who's never seen Star Trek, doesn't know who Spock was or Kirk, or didn't recognize William Shatner's character. I couldn't understand. I couldn't. They would not be able to figure out what was going on necessarily, or the impact of that. But anybody and the majority of people have seen some form of Star Trek. So I thought that was really well composed in so many different ways.
Yeah, beautiful piece of art. Have you been to a Star Trek convention?
I actually went to one last fall. They
Nice.
were really, really popular for a long time. I will tell you, I still have my program from the 1973 and 74 and 75 Star Trek conventions in New York.
Whoa.
So I was a teenager. I went to those. They were the first. I think the first one was either 72 or 72, I think. So I did go to those. I attended many of the conventions put on by Creation Conventions, which was the main company that was doing so many of them. And then for whatever reason, Creation did conventions did kind of spread out to doing Xena conventions and Smallville. Now they're doing a bunch of other shows as well, but they haven't. Last year may have been the only one of a couple in the last few years they even did here in the Bay Area. So I did go to it. Um, Anson Mount was there. There were a few people from Strange New Worlds and from a couple of the other shows that were there. So I sat through, some of the panels were really kind of good. I was disappointed by the dealer's room. It was a lot smaller than I would have expected. But I'll probably go to it again. I think there's another one coming up this fall. So I'll probably go again because it's fun being around Trek people
Hell yeah.
in many respects. And I like to hear from folks. And I will. I don't know if we talked about this before, but I did have opportunity to meet William Shatner and then actually have dinner at his house years ago.
And you didn't do it, or you
No, I
did?
did. I had.
Ah,
I did.
quality.
I did. Yeah. Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
good?
In fact, I was able to he's a good cook. I got to tell you that. Um, he invited me. I met him at a Tournament of Roses, the Rose Bowl cocktail party. He was the Grand Marshal one year in the 90s and of the parade. My dad was producing the international broadcast of both the parade and the game. So he snuck me into the cocktail party. And my dad had worked with Shatner in television like 30 years before. Not that Shatner remembered him at all. But when my father introduced me to him, um, he introduced me as a parapsychologist, not as a Star Trek fan. And we did not talk at all about Star Trek at that time. We talked about parapsychology and also specifically, he had co-authored a really fun novel with somebody, a writing partner, about Houdini and Arthur Conan Doyle, called Believe. Really great. It's a great book. I've actually got it on my shelf back here. And he said, would you come down and sometimes come down to my house and talk to my friends about parapsychology? And I said, of course I would.
Hell yeah.
So we arranged for me to come down a couple months later. And there was, I think Adam Nimoy was there, if I recall correctly. But there were really not TV people per se there. It was some of his neighbors and a couple of friends, mainly people who he knew because he owns horses also. And his
I
next
know he
door
knows
neighbors, I think his
horses.
next door neighbors were, yeah, his next door neighbors were veterinarians and they were there too. So it was a really fun, it was a fun time. It was really nice. He
Awesome.
was, they were making fun of him mercilessly. It's really interesting that after all the reputation stuff you would hear about Shatner, um, he could take a joke. Let's put it that way.
I think you have to, don't you, in that business? You can't live on
Oh yeah,
pure ego. If you
yeah,
do, it's just game over. My girlfriend took
yeah.
him out riding actually on horses because he came over.
Oh,
Well,
cool.
she used to be a riding instructor in a big fancy hotel, so I took him out a few times. So yeah, she's met him. That was before my time, so I wish I had, but hey ho. I did see him at a convention, but I didn't want to pay like £3,000 for a 10-second signature. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I haven't done that either. I've thought about, they're usually about $100 here. I've thought about doing that and just walking up and just, saying hi, but you know, not worth it.
Do you think he'd recognize you?
I think he would because I've been on the shows that he's hosted,
Ah,
some of
there
the
you go.
TV shows. Not that he was there in any of those, but if he pays attention at all to any of his shows, in fact, there's another one coming up this month, another episode of one of his shows that I did a segment for not too long ago, an interview for. So, you know, um, I'm pretty sure that he would know who I was.
Good. Quality stuff. Right, thank you for talking about Star Trek with me. I'm sure there's one more question I've had in my head, but I've forgotten about it, but we'll come back
Anytime.
to it later. Um, what is the best question do you think you've ever been asked by one of your students at one of your lectures? Something that's stuck with you.
Okay, so actually, it's a really interesting question, especially since this has come up a few times. I was watching a documentary the other day from 2016, 2017, where it was a very skeptical documentary about the paranormal, and they did talk about the simulation hypothesis, that's out there, the world, that kind of thing. So one of my students actually asked me that, do I subscribe to the simulation theory, and do you think that psychic events, paranormal events, are glitches? And I said, well, A, I don't subscribe to them. And if we are in a simulation, how do you know those are not features instead of glitches?
And that's your favorite one, yeah?
But that's one of my favorite ones. I mean, the other one obviously is just, the idea of what is a ghost, or how can we prove ghosts? And I like talking about the fact that it's consciousness. We can't prove that at this point. We don't even know, goes back to Star Trek, that episode where Data was on trial for being a machine or being a sentient organism, and Picard said something like, prove to me, to one of the other folks, the living people there, prove to me you have a mind. And we can't prove, we assume those things. We can't prove those things.
Yeah, good episode. That Measure of a Man, I think that one was called. Not
That's
that
correct.
I'm
Yeah,
uber
that is right.
anal, but yeah, I know that one. Also, you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
just reminded me, the Buffy thing, the singing episode. I thought that was ace, and I actually, after that, I downloaded the soundtrack to that because I thought there was some really good songs in it. But actually, I
Oh yeah,
don't
it
think it
was,
was the first
it was
one.
fun.
The first one was. Did you ever watch a program called Lex? It's a Canadian sci-fi show.
Yes, I have.
There was
Yeah.
an episode of
Yeah.
that called Brigade Doom, I think it was, and they did a musical episode. I think that was way
Oh,
before. But
interesting. Yeah, I
yeah,
did not
look
know
that
that.
up.
Yeah, I know
That's
that
good.
was that was the first. Yeah, I can see that, I know that there have been other shows where people have broken out in song, of course, usually in a dream sequence of some kind.
Mm,
This, I know that one was credited as the first American show that was not a comedy or a musical normally, that was there. I mean, they even did a musical episode on Lucifer. They did a musical episode. They've done musical episodes in so many other shows since then.
hell yeah, it's
And
a
of
bit
course, now we
weird,
have
but
a Strange New Worlds. We have a Strange New Worlds episode that's going to involve the Muppets. So
yeah,
coming
I'm
up.
not sure how I think about that. Or sorry, how I feel about that. I love Muppets with the Passion, the original Muppets, but does it
Yeah,
have a place in Star Trek?
it'll be interesting to see the context. I think
Mm,
it's going to be the context,
I know, but it does worry me a
but
bit.
I'm sure it's going to be Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be controversial. So
It reminds me of this, Lloyd, right? Where you get like Darth Vader, Alien from the Alien franchise. You have this, and to some extent, the Borg as well in Star Trek. You have this amazingly well-crafted villain that's uber ace, uber powerful, and then over time they soften to that you then don't almost give a shit about it anymore because it's not what it used to be. And I worry that that's happening in a way to Star Trek when they do things like that, the Muppet things, that they somehow soften or weaken it.
I see those really as, there were episodes like The Trouble with Tribbles, which was a very humorous episode of the original series. There were other episodes where there was goofy stuff going on in them as well. And I see those as just simply, um, you don't have to include those necessarily in the straight continuity, but I see those as good examples of pure entertainment, and that they're only being done for entertainment purposes. And I can excuse those here and there, in a show that doesn't stick to a very serious through line, because they don't. I mean, the characters on Star, there's humor even in some of the horror ones that's there, and that's always been the case in Star Trek, in some way, shape, or form. I mean, there was that episode in Deep Space Nine. I think it was called Little Green Men, where Quark and Odo and ended up back at Area 51,
Yeah.
and that was a interesting science fiction concept, interesting idea for UFO stuff, but also humorous, very humorous, and had no impact long range on the show. And I think that's it. As long as it doesn't have significant impact overall for the continuity, I think it's okay to do stuff like that.
No, that's fair enough. Do you know what? It reminds me of something else. I wrote a script for Deep Space Nine actually, and sent it
Hmm.
in. Paramount rejected it, needless to say, but I was pleased I did it nonetheless. I want to get into silly sessions. You mentioned this last time as well. It intrigued me. I rewatched our original show a couple of days ago to do questions for this, and now I thought, oh, I wonder what's going on there. You said you asked a fair few humorous questions to some of the NHIs, non-human intelligences, or whatever were there. Can you give me some of the examples of some of the questions that were asked and some of the answers that were given?
Boy, I wish you had given me time to think about this beforehand. I just have
Sorry.
to think about. That's okay. Because I mean, for the channeling stuff, it goes way back. One which is not necessarily silly, but it was kind of a really amusing situation was I was doing a local talk show during the channeling era, and they were having several channelers on a panel. It was a panel of channels, and John Climo, who I mentioned earlier in the show, was on the panel, and they actually had me on this local talk show a bunch of times, and they called me and asked me to be on the show as the skeptic. So they asked me to be this to ask skeptical questions, not negative necessarily. So there's John is at one end of the panel. There's three channelers. This woman, Kathy Reardon, who's the one who eventually became a really good psychic, is next to me on one side. And then there's this other woman there was another woman who was a walk-in. That's very specific kind of channeling where, you change consciousness with somebody on a different planet or something like that. That in itself was psychologically interesting. Um, and then on the one side of me was a woman. And so we had um, uh, actually a faculty member from JFK University who was channeling the Michael entity. So Michael was a group entity that was written about originally here out of Berkeley. Then this woman was the walk-in, Kathy Rudin sitting next to me. The lady next to me was channeling Athena. That's all I heard, Athena. The way this worked is there was a period where they all were going into trance or into an altered state. So it's like dead air at that point. And for whatever reason, instead of asking John Climo to narrate what was going on, they asked me to narrate what was going on. So that happens. Then we have Jose channeling the Michael entity, the woman talking as the entity from Andromeda that she switched with, Kathy talking with the voice of the 17th century Irish woman, and there's Athena. Now, Athena was very quiet. We break to commercial. I turn to Athena and say, the woman Athena says, "So, Athena, you the Greek goddess?" And for a moment, there's nothing. And she says, "No, there were no Greek gods. I am the thought form created by the belief of the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, representing wisdom and being a wise warrior." And I thought, thought form is something we don't really talk about in parapsychology. It's an idea that comes from various cultures. It's the idea that in some respects, there's the tulpa in Tibetan mythology that if you put enough mental energy into something, you create an entity, not just an imprint, but something that might be self-determining in some way. So you're almost creating a ghost that way. And I thought that was possibly the best answer I'd heard from any channeler explaining who or what they're talking to than anything else. And it wasn't necessarily a silly question, but it was certainly not a serious question. I mean, I did not expect that, honestly. I expected her to say, "Yes, I'm Athena, the Greek goddess," that kind of thing. Um, and I challenged some of these people, like somebody was channeling somebody from the Pleiades and talking in a very robotic voice. It's like, so is this how you talk back home? Um, you know, can you say a few words in Pleiadian or Atlantean or something like that? So we have to kind of sometimes I get a little sarcastic with that, a little snarky with some of the channelers. I haven't had to do that with any of the mediums though, because there's a different quality or context, and for all of that. And frankly, I've been a little snarky with some of the people claiming a degree of accuracy.
I don't blame you. I mentioned it earlier. The channeling one I am highly skeptical of, and
Yeah.
it's that when you ask specific questions such as, can you talk to him in Pleiadian, and nothing comes back, you then think to yourself, why? If you are a true Pleiadian, it means nothing to you to say a few
Right.
words in that language, so why not? All that does is throw your trust onto that person who claims to be the channeler. And that's just not
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. That, yeah. There's some elements of mediumship that would explain why the mediums can't talk in other languages, which we know from also from the brain studies and such. But with that, not, as I mentioned earlier, not being, what kind of car do you drive back home? Are you dead or are you alive? Are you projecting?
Mm,
So you can ask all sorts of questions to the channelers. And I think channeling, for whatever reason, the 1980s was just like the right milieu for channeling. But people became less enchanted with that, certainly over time, and more wanted more personal information, which is where mediumship really kind of did a major comeback, because
agreed.
that can be very personal.
You mentioned Michael. Was that the thought form that was created as well? Because wasn't it a group of people that focused to create a ghost? Was that Michael?
Now, well, according to the Michael Channeler and to I think some of the stuff that I read from Chelsea Quinn Yarborough, um, this was a group of people on the other side
Oh,
who would take turns, would be in agreement. They talk about stuff. They take turns speaking through whoever that medium happened to be. And because it was a group of people, you could actually have three people channeling Michael at the same time in different places, because
wow.
it's multiple people, not just presenting a philosophy, presenting certain information. Again, there was not really any specific information on who those people were. You couldn't identify them. Again, it's very different than evidential mediumship.
Sure, maybe I'm thinking of the wrong name, and a name that literally just popped into my mind after I said Michael was Peter. Is that the right one? That's a ghost that was
I
created by
think,
people.
yeah, I think that was the description of it. I think that's about right. If I'm thinking of the right one, I'd have to go back and watch the video. But there were no, it might not have been that one. I think maybe I'm thinking of Dr. Peepers or some Peters or something like that. There was an entity that several people were channeling, and the one that was on a TV show that I was consulting with, a talk show that I was consulting with, the guy was definitely a phony. So
Oh, okay.
kind of tough. Yeah.
Side note, we'll park that one. This next question is going to sound quite horrible as a question, but it doesn't. Again, my intention isn't that. So the question is, why do you exist, Lloyd? What's the reason for you? Is there not a reason, or is there a reason? Is it just that you are?
Well, I mean, I exist because my parents got together at a certain point, and not going to go
Science
into the
1-0.
details, but um, this question is why anybody exists, for that matter. I mean,
Yeah.
I personally exist to live, to learn, to have fun, to educate people. Um, my I don't have a mission in life per se, but I feel, like I said, very strongly about passing along the knowledge that I've learned, and also correcting the misconceptions. I have to correct one of the misconceptions I always have to correct. A lot of the ghost hunting podcasts that I've done, they introduced me as a pioneer of the paranormal. It's like, I'm not that old. 140 years plus. It's like, I'm not that old. So, and I had people teaching me, so clearly I'm not a pioneer. So I really feel like, as far as parapsychology is concerned, I exist as I feel very strongly about being an interface between the truly academic scientific folks who don't even know what the ghost hunting shows are. I mean, honestly, I've been surprised that some of my colleagues don't even know they exist. So that's a different story. But between them and the public, and between them, it's kind of an interface in that way. And I've always felt that, just as to be there. But um, part of it is I exist to do interesting things and to have fun, to learn
Okay,
more.
now I like the way you answered the question, but I think I should have laid a bit more groundwork because I wasn't intending that avenue.
Okay.
What I was intending was, why do you or why do we come here? If we are consciousness elsewhere, why do you think we come here? So yours could be that you've come to do those exact
No, I got
things.
it. I got it. Yeah, yeah. So what's interesting about this, I mean, this is a question that comes up in various cultures, especially when talking about reincarnation. What is it? Why does somebody need to reincarnate? Why does somebody incarnate at all if we exist elsewhere? And the answer is if that's a non-physical world, a non-physical universe, or I should say non-corporeal. Can't say non-physical because it's technically still physics, possibly different physics. They can't experience, let's back up. Why does anybody travel anywhere in the world to a place that is so different than where they live? Why does anybody do that? To experience, to not just to have to really get something out of that travel, to get something out of that culture, get something out of that area, to eat the food, to do all of that. So I see that as kind of analogous to why would consciousness download into humans and then go back to where it is? It's to experience a different aspect of reality. Our reality be very different than a non-corporeal consciousness reality, whatever that happens to be. There's a book called Traitor to the Living by Philip Jose Farmer, science fiction novel, in which is described that once you die, your consciousness becomes part of an electromagnetic body universe. So you don't have a physical body, you have an EM body. And the book is about bringing people back into bodies in some respects. But it's a really interesting exploration that this very, very idea that we learn, even if consciousness starts here and then goes on to someplace else, that information, that knowledge, that emotion, all of that gets carried with us. And I think that's why that question can be answered that way.
We're essentially the strange new world, aren't we?
Yes, yeah. And our consciousness is sightseeing.
Exploring it, literally. I like it. That means
Right.
Star Trek is real. We are living Star Trek.
In some universe, I believe Star Trek is real. That's right. Yeah.
No, it 100% is real. People have asked me that before. Yes, it
Yeah.
exists. So does a Star Wars universe. We just haven't got there yet.
So
It
does
is
Doctor
real.
Who. I mean, Star Trek and Doctor Who have already mentioned each other. So
Yeah, well, and isn't loads of things are in each other's movies, aren't they? Like there's Star Wars
yeah.
and Indiana Jones, all sorts of things going on. I love it. And E.T. being
Well,
one
I
of them,
mean, that's
another
because
classic.
the writers and yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
But they do exist. They're all real. Um, what are your thoughts on life reviews?
Well, I mean, people talk about them in relation to near-death experiences very often. And also sometimes they'll mention them as they're dying, in terms of um, the deathbed visions or the deathbed experiences that people have that have been reported for well over 100 years. Um, Mediums talk about the life review as happening initially. The mediums I work with at the Forever Family Foundation, this question comes up quite a bit in terms of what happens when you die and do you get punished if you're a bad person, all of that. And the general consensus is really interesting is that after you die, you have a life review. Sadly or strangely, some people say, well, yeah, you have to have a life review like that movie Defending Your Life. And you have to talk about what good things and bad things you did, and then they'll bureaucratically assign you someplace else afterwards. There's someone I heard speak, somebody who had been in the field for a long time, but he was getting a little old, and he started talking about the afterlife. First, you have to do a life review in front of other entities, and then you have to fill out paperwork to move on to the next level. And there's
Bloody
7 levels where you
paperwork.
have to go through the bureaucracy. Yeah, I feel like that's hell because it's just paperwork.
Yeah.
But mediums have talked about the idea that once, good person, bad person, you have a life review after you're dead, after you die. And you're confronted with everything you did, every good thing you did, everything bad thing you did, in a way that you can't escape. If you did bad things, you cannot escape knowing that those were bad things. And one of the mediums, I think, said, So when it comes to hell, for some people, that life review is hell. But once they're through that review, they can move on. So that's an interesting kind of interpretation of that life review. But it is reported by people who have near-death experiences, and again, through the mediums as well.
Do you put stock in it?
I don't know that, it would depend on what your consciousness actually is at that point, because we'd be talking about like fast tracking all the stuff in your life through an element of time that is, you know, minimal here. One of the interesting things that comes out of mediumship quite often is that wherever it is, whatever the existence is on the other side, what if you keep using that term, time doesn't exist the same way. I mean, time, we do know there's physical time, space time, and there's also conceptual time. Time is a construct in some respects for us as living people. And if where you are when you're not in the body is not subject to the flow of time the way we think of it, and that's been explored in various science fiction books in general, just generally, then I could see that life review could take a while if you were measuring time somewhere else. And here it would take a split second because it doesn't compare. It's not the same, not the same existence.
Hmm. The reason I asked, do you
So I
put
don't have any
stock?
problem with that idea. Yeah.
No, good, good.
Excuse
That's
me?
what I was getting at. I was wondering whether you think,
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
wonder
don't
what
have any.
mine's going to be
I
like.
think it makes sense. Yeah, I think it makes sense in the way that people are talking about remembering things they never remembered. Sometimes from their death experiences, we can only for life review after you die and are dead, like really dead. We can only get that from mediums at this point, or I don't know of any ghosts who have communicated that at all. So apparently, it doesn't happen when you die that way.
Or they didn't get
If
to
you
the
stick
life
around
review.
in other
Yeah.
right. So I had one apparition case I think we talked about, which was a really kind of seminal case for me, really important case for me, where we were able to ask questions of the apparition and that had been seen by family members, but there was only their kid was the only one who was
That's
actually
right.
regularly
Yeah.
talking to her. And when I asked what happened when you died, she died in the hospital. She did not die at home, had cancer, the whole bit. So as she was dying, what we got, the kid is listening to this after I asked what happened when you died. Um, he says she says as she was dying in the hospital, she knew she was dying. That's not a surprise. Um, she reviewed her life, so she had the life review, and she realized that one of the things she realized or recognized is that her family wasn't religious and didn't know if there was a heaven or hell. So she just wanted to go home, and she closed her eyes, and the next thing she knew, she was in the living room of her house. So she even had a life review before she passed, of
Oh,
sorts,
weird.
and recognized certain things about her past that led her to intend to do something else.
Quality. Now, I love that case that you talked about last time, and it led me to wonder what do you have another case similar, or doesn't have to be similar, just another case that has stuck with you that we could briefly talk about before the Koit zone?
So it's I don't really have any cases that were that impactful in that sense, in the way of initially. Um, the case that I one of the cases I spent a lot of time with was a case of a restaurant called the Moss Beach Distillery. And there's a lot of stuff out there on my YouTube channel, my Lloyd Auer, youtube.com/Lloyd Auerbach. There are clips we've done a lot of TV there over the years. I haven't done much the last few years, but I started there in 1991. And we were working with Japanese TV. I had a Japanese medium there. Um, I knew about the case by doing some research on it. I did talk to a local historian at one point also about how far back the stories went. I found some old newspaper clippings, all of that. The inception of the ghost was a murder, but there are still questions about exactly how the murder happened. Although the old timers, as I got involved in the case, I was able to talk to people who were alive during the end of Prohibition at the time when this, or in that kind of last few years of Prohibition, which was when her murder happened on the beach down below, and some other factors that we actually only got from the ghost. So it was kind of interesting. So one of the interesting things that happened in that first session, after interviewing people and we had equipment, we were trying to figure out what's going on, is Mrs. Gibo, the Japanese medium, sits down at a table which people had reported experiencing or feeling the ghost, that this is where she often sat or hung out in the restaurant. And she's looking across the table at nobody. There's a chair there. And the Japanese crew is filming all this. This is for a TV special in Japan. And she's asked, Mrs. Gibo speaking to the ghost. She's telling us, right? She already told me before we went on. She went on camera about this, and the director, through the translator, is prompting me to ask questions. So Mrs. Gibo is speaking Japanese to the ghost, and the first thing I asked was, which is again a silly question. So, does the ghost understand Japanese? Is she speaking Japanese to you? And Mrs. Gibo, I swear that I wish I had a picture of the look on her face, like, you're an idiot, was the look I saw. And I knew the answer. She said, I am communicating with her mind to mind. She's not speaking, it's mind to mind. And that's conceptual, there's words and stuff, but it doesn't matter what language it is, it's just mind to mind. I'm speaking Japanese for the cameras, because we have a Japanese audience. Right, so go on, and at some point in this conversation, which I'm getting slight translations of, at least Mrs. Gibo's, she reaches down to a bag she's got next to her and pulls out a couple of fashion magazines. Mrs. Gibo was a really interesting, non-egoistic psychic. She would travel anywhere with this TV crew as long as she spent a couple of days shopping somewhere. So San Francisco was a great place for her to go. She also let us test her in various laboratories at all sorts of different psychic tasks. She failed miserably in some of them. She said right up front before you even tried it, I've never tried this before. Let's see what happens. And she didn't care that she failed because she knew she couldn't do everything. So that's the kind of people I like to work with. So she pulls out this fashion magazine and she flips through it. She holds it up, points to something, puts it down, flips again, holds it up. And it's like, Mrs. Gibo, what are you doing? She says, she's asking me for fashion advice. Okay, so I didn't think much of that. 2 weeks later, get a call from one of the wait staff, one of the folks who had seen the ghost regularly. This ghost has been known as the Blue Lady since she died. She later on, much later after this initial time, I found from talking to one of these old timers, she was often called the Blue Lady because she always showed up wearing bright blue dresses when she was alive, and she'd hang out after work and at the hotel that was nearby and sit with a piano player who she was having, her boyfriend, basically. So a couple weeks later, I get this call from one of the wait staff. She's like, I know it's not a different ghost because the face is the same, but she's wearing a little black dress. She's not in her blue clothes anymore. What's going on? What did you guys do? So I checked with Mrs. Gibo via, through the folks I knew at Japanese TV. Yeah, she had explained to the ghost how she could mentally change her clothing, and now she's wearing whatever she wants. And over time, it was always interesting getting the same facial and other descriptors about her from people who did not even know anything other than she's known as a Blue Lady, and anything you researched, at least for quite a while, you would have found that she was wearing a blue dress. And now they think, is this a different ghost? I mean, she's wearing such and such clothing or more modern clothing. So that was a really interesting piece. And over time, I found a couple of very interesting things happening with her. I was there a lot, not only for television, just in general. And I did some events there. I brought some psychics in. We did some events there. And we were doing, I was doing a couple night, well, actually, this is a little bit first. One thing that you'll find if you go online and look about the Moss Distillery is in 1997. It's not really explicitly stated in more than a couple of articles. It is in one of the clips on TV on my YouTube channel. But they had to take the building, which was built in 1926, they had to take it down to the studs because it's on a slight hill, and with earthquake issues, it had moved down the hill a little bit. It wasn't completely stable, so they had to stabilize it. They had to pull it apart. They had to go work with the historical society because it was a historical site, and they put it back together. And they put it back together slightly differently. They were able to move a couple of things downstairs. The ladies' room got moved, and a couple other things got moved. But generally, if you saw the upstairs, you would never have known it was any different at all, for that matter.
Sure.
I should also mention on that first trip with Mrs. Guibo, the ghost apparently opened a door 5 times for us on camera.
Nice.
That was yeah. So we actually had a physical thing happening as well. So during the construction, there was activity happening then. The contractors, the guys working on the building were reporting all sorts of weird stuff going on. She was very playful. She would kind of whack or pinch guys who were repair people in the kitchen on the rear end if they were bent over. So she was very
Cancelled. We have
playful
to cancel her immediately.
Yeah. She was definitely not part of the Me Too generation. Let's put it that way. But we ended the owner came to me and said, "Hey, look, can you get the ghost to do more stuff once we open up again?" It's like, only if she wants to.
Yeah.
But the the haunted Queen Mary, which is down in Long Beach, California, put in special effects for their ghost tour back in the late 80s, which you never see anybody on any of the TV shows ever talking about. So I suggested we do that. I also suggested that if we're going to put in effects replicating some of the things that are reported, we are not going to put them in exactly the same spots that they have typically been reported, that she's been active. Because I wanted if somebody actually said, well, this actually happened here, it's like, yeah, that's not the ghost, that's the special effect. I just wanted to be able to be very clear about that. And we actually had a press party kind of talking about the effects and showing them and explaining how they work with the ghost. And I had a medium there. My late friend Annette Martin was there communicating. And in that session, we got some very specific information on her name and other factors that, again, it took me a while through other sources to track down and confirm. So we got some good information there from that. In Annette's communications with her, I got very similar things that I got from the other ghosts that ghost I mentioned earlier. And then we were doing 2-night, overnight, kind of videoing throughout the place, throwing environmental sensors everywhere, 3 different psychics, getting all sorts of information. I'm alone in the bar area. They're off after hours, after they closed. And I'm behind the bar, and all of a sudden, I feel this really weird tingling sensation moving through me. And it went back to front, and then it went front to back. And in my mind, and I knew it was not my eyes, it was my mind's eye, I'm seeing this giggling blonde woman, honey blonde woman, hair is up a certain way, wearing certain jewelry, wearing a little black dress, walking back and forth through me. And I started timing this. I knew it was the ghost, at least I felt it was the ghost. Started timing it. And 2.5 minutes later, Annette Martin and 2 other psychics come walking around the corner. Annette looks over and starts laughing, and she says, "She's walking through you, isn't she?" And the other 2 made some other comments, and it all stopped and went away. And they were narrating what was happening to me at the time. And then I separated the 3 of them. I had them write down exactly what she was wearing and the jewelry, and they all matched. So at that point, people usually ask me, well, how could you time it? I mean, weren't you scared? It's like, it actually felt pretty good. She was giggling. It felt kind of giggly, and she was in that way. Since that time, there were several instances where I was speaking in public. In fact, one time when I was at that mediumship conference I referenced earlier in Charlottesville, Virginia, I was talking about the distillery. A friend of mine who was a psychic was in the audience who had been to the distillery. And there were other mediums. Mostly there were academics and other people, but there were some mediums in the audience as well, local people. And my friend Ankasha came walking up to, first of all, she actually pointed to my left, was kind of waving at me and pointing to my left. And I kind of felt something to my left. And then she came up to me afterwards. She said, Kate, the ghost, was standing next to you, watching you carefully, listening very carefully, make sure you did her story justice. So as we're talking, two women from one side, one woman from another that identify themselves as mediums separately come up and say, "Did you know there was a ghost standing next to you, to your left?" And I said, what she looked like? And they described the same thing. So she appeared with me. She appeared apparently at another conference that I did. In fact, two other conferences. And then the very first time I had a session with Sandra O'Hara, this group session, the medium I mentioned from Ireland earlier, Sandra, I didn't expect anything. And in that session, Sandra says, "This is really weird." And her friend who brought her over, Carrie, was saying, what's so weird? She says, "This is not somebody on the other side. This is somebody who's here, who's actually here on Earth." She said, "I've never had this experience before without going to a haunted place." And we were in like a community center. And she starts describing her and then says, "Does anybody recognize this ghost?" She says her name is Kate. So again, conversation through a medium, and we've had other similar conversations through a medium. I think the most interesting piece was in 2004, we did Annette Martin and I did a session for a group of people at the restaurant. We had the lights on. This was just, and she had Kate, she started talking to Kate, did some other mediumship also. And Annette would allow Kate to jump in, basically do trance and come in. And there was a local newscaster, weather guy, who was also a stand-up comic, and he asked her a couple of questions. One, "Kate, what do you miss most about being alive?" And the comment was, that came back from Kate. This is not when she was in a trance, but from Annette was kind of passing through. She says, "Strawberry ice cream and sex," was the response, which was fun. And at which point Annette said, "Loyd almost did that a few years ago."
Yeah, exactly.
And then, yeah, and then I said, we asked, "So was there any place in the world you wanted to go that you couldn't go to when you were alive?" And the response was Paris. She always wanted to go to Paris. And I explained, "Well, you can hop a plane," kiddingly, "you can hop a plane, you can take a boat over, you can just simply fly. You're a ghost. You can go anywhere you want. You don't need a ticket." But I kiddingly said, "But send me a postcard when you get there." So about 3 months later, I get an unsolicited email from a woman in France identifying herself as a medium. And she said, "I was doing a session and some American woman comes by, some ghost dropped in." She describes this blonde woman. She says her name is Kate and that she should find the parapsychologist named Loyd in California and tell him she made it to Paris. The
I
medium then
know, which
says,
is all
that was the
mind
message.
blowing.
That's
Literally.
well, what gets better because the medium then says, "I had no idea what to do." So I did know people at the Institut Metapsychique in Paris, which is a 100-plus-year-old organization connected to psychical research parapsychology. And an old friend of mine, Mario Varvoglis, was the director. So she contacts the institute, and Mario says, "Well, there's only one Loyd in parapsychology, and he's in California," and gave her my email. So I did get a postcard.
Yeah, just a digital one. A couple of questions, right? Why did that one person say she's not passed over? She's alive.
Well, talking to mediums about this, a lot of mediums will use the different words for ghost and spirit, different concepts. So to them, a ghost is someone who, when they die, they don't move on to the other side.
Oh,
They
okay,
don't
I
pass
get it.
on. They stay here for whatever reason. Whereas spirit is the other side. They project back. They don't actually show up. They show themselves through a projection, you might say. This
Got
this
you.
is the description that mediums often give. Yeah. So Kate was still here in our physical world.
I got you. Um, the the effects that were put into that distillery. What
Yeah.
did Kate think of those?
She didn't screw around with them, which was really nice. That's one thing we were really worried about. I actually had to have Annette have a talk with her about it. Um, she would participate in some of them in a different way. She thought, I mean, it came down to the fact that the reason she was still at the restaurant hanging out there is because, number one, great memories, not so much of her death, but of her boyfriend and of the days that she was there partying and during Prohibition, because it was a speakeasy and it was one of those
Yeah,
places you
yeah.
get illegal alcohol. Uh, and so that was one piece. And she liked being around people and she liked to watch people. This is what we heard from multiple psychics over the years, in fact. Um, the effects. So one of the effects was they had 7 Tiffany lamps over the old bar. It was like the original bar that was there. And I actually had witnessed 2 of the end lamps moving, and other people witnessed at either end, the end lamp and the one next to one of the end lamps. There are 4 in the center. So when we put in the effects, we set it up so that the 4 lamps would be the only ones that would be mechanically moved. They were actually moving like in a sequence every 10 or 15. I think we had it set for 10 minutes or something like that. So people sitting at the bar would see things happening. So when somebody would see that, and then they'd all say, strangely, and then the end lamp started moving, and then that end lamp started moving. It's like either they were fully mistaken, they only noticed the ones here really were the ones moving, or Kate was adding to the show, so to speak.
Yeah, enhancing it. I
So
wondered if she thought
in general,
negatively
that
of turning it into a theme park, that.
no, I mean there were some things we were hoping to do. We just there was a limited budget, and we just wanted some things. And most of the things, honestly, if you sat at the bar for more than 20 minutes, if you didn't know that that was a special effect, you would have figured out that was a special effect
Yeah, because
without
it's
question. I
obvious.
mean,
Yeah,
you would have
yeah.
seen the same pattern over and over again.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean the same thing for some other things. We had a face that would appear in one of the side mirrors in the ladies' room
How nice.
because that had been reported. Yeah, and it was, I mean, if you, the idea is you would see it in the main mirror, it'd be off to the side. If you looked on at it directly, you could not possibly think that was anything but an effect.
Got you.
So it's unfortunately one of the TV shows, the Ghost Hunters TV show here in the States, decided to ignore the fact that there were special effects and make it seem like it was a hoax. The whole thing with that was proof that the place was a hoax. So
That's
because they couldn't find anything, they didn't experience anything themselves. And the worst part of it, and I've seen it repeated on something on a podcast that Jason Hawes has done, is that we had it set so the ladies' room, because women years before the ladies' room moved, women would occasionally report being in the ladies' room, seeing the face in the mirror, or somebody standing next to them, hearing some giggly laughter. Okay. So we set it up so that every 9th time the door opened to the ladies' room, a tiny speaker above the door would have this giggling sound, which was actually a recording of a friend of mine. And they made it seem like, they heard that on the show. They start get on a ladder, they get in the ceiling, and they find these speakers right outside the ladies' room. And they announced that clearly shows they found the PA speakers. They didn't find the speaker. They didn't even look for the speaker for the laughter. They found the speakers that pumped in music through the restaurant. So it's like, okay, if you're gonna frame something that way, at least frame it the right way. At
This
least find the
sounds like
right thing. So
high
they weren't
quality
terribly bright about it.
journalism.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Lloyd,
and that the fact that they never bothered. Yeah,
final question
sorry.
on Kate before we move into the Koit zone and wrap up.
Okay.
She was seen with you elsewhere at conferences and stuff. Has she been seen with you in your house?
There was there have been a couple times that I've had psychically sensitive people over that sensed a presence, and I tend to think it might have been Kate visiting me. I don't really know. I do know something really interesting happened. There were some other interesting things that happened. There was a woman I was talking to up in Canada for many years who was asking for help because she was having psychokinetic, physical movement stuff moving around. And she was a PhD geology student, by the way, heavily in science. And I helped her do get more control over it to the point where she ended up being a laboratory participant doing PK for the Rhine Center. She also turned out to have mediumistic ability, and she never had revealed that to me until much later, or certainly not to her husband or anything like that. And how she revealed it to me, she called me up one day, and I said, how you doing? How's the dude PK doing? Fine. But there's something new, something I haven't told you. Sometimes I pick up on ghosts. And there's a woman here, and she starts describing Kate and says her name is Kate, and even told me and start giving me information. Okay. So Kate would go up and visit her in Canada, kind of had a friendship going. When Annette Martin passed away, very suddenly, actually in 2011, Annette and I had been to the distillery many, many times, and Annette had good encounters with Kate over the years. And so I get a call from Annette's husband telling me she passed away. I didn't even know she was back in the hospital. She was in the hospital, and actually sensed some presence. I thought maybe it was Annette that was there in the house, and my wife sent something too, which is interesting. But the next morning, I get a call from the woman in Canada. Loyd, what happened to Annette? It's like, what are you talking about? She said, okay, something has to have happened to Annette because Kate showed up last night with this woman that looks a lot like Annette, but a little bit younger. Now, no one outside of the immediate family, myself and two of Annette's students, knew that Annette died the day before. No one knew that. They certainly didn't know this woman in Canada. So Annette, so I said, it might be Annette. I mean, what did she say? She said she died, and she's now kind of, Kate kind of is helping her transit or understand what it means to be a ghost. And the two of them were seen at the restaurant together and in other places. They actually both came through another medium at one point, the two of them. So down the road. So I guess if you befriend a ghost when you're alive, you might have a friend for death afterwards.
For forever, literally. That means then she also didn't choose to go on, if it is a choice to go on to
Not at that
this
time.
website.
Not at the time. I tend to think she might have gone on. In fact, I know she went on. She did move on by 2014 because three of the Forever Family Foundation mediums during a session we were doing with them, she came through from the other side. So at that point, she had done that.
Oh, okay, good, good. At least it's not a stuck scenario.
Came through in a really weird way, in fact. Yeah.
That's a lovely story. Thank you ever so much for enlightening us on that one. So now let's enter the Koit zone for a second time. Koit zone! Here we go. What food item could you eat until you're sick and regret eating that many?
Well,
Be honest.
I have to say, it wouldn't the stuff that I right now. Yeah, I'm diabetic, and what I would really like to eat is maple sugar candy or something with a lot of maple syrup on it because I love that intensely. But I would say that till I'm sick, probably chocolate, dark chocolate. It would take a
I know,
lot to make
yeah,
me sick, but it would probably make me sick sugar-wise more than anything else first.
no fair play. I know you were a chocolatier, so it had to be that one, didn't it? Um, have you ever lost a shoe, like in mud or something, and you've been unable to retrieve it?
Nope, never.
Okay, fair play. Pick an object from your background and tell me about it.
Well, let's see. What would be fun to do? You want fun or interesting?
I want both. I'm greedy.
You want both. Okay. Okay. So this is a smaller model of, let's see if I can turn off the batteries working. You probably can't see this. This is
Yeah,
one
I
of
can.
the
Yeah.
plasma balls.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right. So I'll tell you a story connected to the Moss Beach Distillery, which involved one of these,
Lush.
which is one of the reasons I like to have little ones around. Um, I'm a mentalist also. I perform, psychic entertainment. And a friend of mine and I were doing a show back in the 90s called Seance Fiction Theater, kind of a play on science fiction theater. And we did a show at the Moss Beach Distillery. We ended up doing a couple shows at the Moss Beach Distillery. One of the shows we did, I brought a large plasma ball with me, and I had some other, goofy scientific equipment behind us that really we weren't using. It just was window dressing, and the ball was on. And we were doing some mentalism stuff, the two of us. And I was talking about the ghost and kind of putting things in the context of this is a ghost story kind of thing. And one of the attendees, who happened to be a magician, we had some skeptical people from the Bay Area skeptics, and we had some other people in the audience. One of them points behind us and says, "Look at that." Everybody looks, and what's going on is on the large plasma wall, you can see what happens when I have one finger, right? You can see
Yeah.
even my finger showing up there. The the outline of a hand was on the globe,
Oh, amazing.
and it moved around the globe. And Larry, my partner, was he was a skeptic, a true skeptic, not disbelieving, not believing kind of skeptic. And he looked at me, and we just said, thank you, Kate. And so that happened. At the end, several of those magicians in the audience came up to us and said, how did you guys do that? And Larry looked at me again, and he said, very, very straight face, he said, "We're still working on perfecting that effect. We're hoping to sell that at some point. We cannot reveal how we did that." Now, he
Yeah,
didn't
you have
want to
to
tell
take a ghost
people.
with you on your
Now, I got to
tour.
tell you, right, right. We did tell the other people who were interested, but we tried to figure out or work with other people to duplicate that effect, to come up with, because we could sell that to magicians and mentalists for a lot of money. We tried. We were not able to be successful. There was no explanation for how that could possibly have happened.
That is a quality story, and
How's that?
yeah, no, I love it. I love it. What was your mentalist name, by the way, or is?
Oh, it's what I go by, Professor Paranormal.
Ah, there you go. I didn't write it
Yeah,
down, but I thought that question.
which is also, yeah, it's also what I go by now. What I've been going by in parapsychology too. So,
Thank you, thank you. What is the best fruit flavor?
well, technically, chocolate's a fruit, but
I'm
let me
not
think.
thinking chocolate. No, you can't
Comes
have
from
that
a
one.
fruit. It comes from a fruit. Yeah. Best fruit flavor. Uh, I for actual real flavor, I am partial to really sweet watermelon or really sweet peaches.
And there you go. Nice one. Um, what do you think is your finest achievement?
I think my finest achievement in some respects is some of my former students who are out there in the world of parapsychology doing work. That's probably um, from the teaching end of things. I think otherwise um, it, it'd be hard to pin down to any one thing. I think in some respect, my book Mind Over Matter, which I'm going to be bringing back into print again. It's out of print right now. It's one of my best books.
Fair play to you. I like the fact that you chose a human aspect rather than an ego aspect first. That says a lot. Well played, you.
It
Um,
it it, yeah, it's who I am. So I mean, yeah.
yeah, fair play. What body part would you be willing to give up for whatever reward you want?
My little toe.
Really? Wow. I bet he says appendix,
One of
but you
them.
didn't. You're actually giving up a
Well, I
toe.
can't because I've already given that up. I don't have an appendix, so I haven't had one
Ah,
since I was 3,
but it would have been then
and I've
if.
already got rid of
Yeah.
my tonsil.
Ah,
It
crikey,
might have been
yeah.
my appendix or my tonsils, but I don't have those either. So yeah,
Wow, wow, amazing.
and I've already given
What?
up a couple of teeth.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I got a weird gap here. What paranormal ability would you like to have?
I would love to have psychokinetic control of mind over matter. That's the one I would, because with that you could do all sorts of superpower type things. Not just
Yeah.
I'm not limiting it to moving objects. I mean, you could make a computer work faster and better. You could fix things pretty easily as well as break them. Technically, I could fly, be invulnerable. Somebody could shoot a bullet at me and prevent that from hitting me. So,
You're adding a lot of
duplicate a lot of
superhero
super.
effects here.
Yeah, well, that's because I'm a comic book guy. So,
I know, and that was my next question, but I think you've already answered. I wrote along those lines, what comic book superhero ability would you love to have? But you've literally said it. You want to deflect bullets, so you want to be Superman.
yeah, yeah. I think I'm a big Superman fan, have been forever. So, and actually, I reference those things like deflecting bullets and things because that's something that I read in a science fiction magazine. Somebody had postulated that Superman wasn't really super. He really had this unconsciously psychic abilities that were duplicating everything, including his heat vision.
Ah. Hey,
And they gave a really good explanation of how that could possibly happen, too. So, yeah.
nice, nice. Speaking of Superman, did you watch the new one? And what did you think?
I've already seen it 3 times. I just bought the Blu-ray. Yeah, I guess you could
Uh,
say that.
so you love it then?
It's, I mean, no disrespect to Man of Steel and the other ones. Though I love the Christopher Reeve movie. I saw that as a teenager, but I will say that this movie felt more like the Superman I know from comic books today and in recent times. And more importantly, every time I've watched it, it's left me with a smile.
You can't ask for any more of a recommendation than that, can you? It's a glowing recommendation if it leaves a smile. Um, Last question in the Coit Zone. What was the last chocolate you made?
I haven't made a lot of chocolate lately. The last chocolate I made was a goat cheese, dark chocolate goat cheese ganache. So basically, I was making it for a friend's party as a spread. You'd actually be able to spread it on cookies and
Oh, I
things like
see.
that. But
Spreadable
that's often
chocolate.
been that's often been the filling. I've used that as filling for truffles in the past.
Nice,
So
nice.
using basically the spreadable kind of goat cheese, really a nice combination with chocolate.
Awesome. Thank you ever so much for that answer,
I
and
will be
thank you for.
making, yeah, I was gonna say I will be making pumpkin pie spice chocolate this month, in fact, for Halloween,
There
and
you
some little
go.
ghosties.
Nice. Thank you ever so much for going through the Coit Zone with me once again. That leaves us to our final question. Is there a project you're currently working on?
Besides the classes I have starting up right now, I am slowly but surely working on taking the transcripts from a course I've taught a couple times to the Rhine Center, which is called Presenting the Paranormal to the Public, and turning that into a book. So I have the transcripts. I'm going to have AI edit the transcripts for me, not write them, but edit them for me. And then I'm going to be adding to them with some sort of the PowerPoint slide, just some things in there as well. So I'm hoping to get that done in the next month or two, even before the next a paranormal casebook part 2. So
Awesome.
that's the project.
Awesome. It's nice to have things on the go, I always think. So nice one for you. Lloyd, thank you ever so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time and all the stuff you've disseminated to me today. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Nice conversation, as
Yeah, thank
always.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you ever so much. Guys, check out the links in the description to Lloyd's sites, his socials, etc., etc. Go and check them out. Enjoy the content. Right, on that note, goodbye everyone, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye bye. To watch other KoitCast episodes, please click the image top left. To subscribe to my channel, please click the image top right. Please like and share to help KoitCast grow, and most importantly of all, please click the notification bell so you never miss an upload.